Check, check, check. Hello, hello. What's up, Aristo? What's up, Aristo? Okay, sounds good. Cool, cool, cool. Just kind of chill for a little bit. Wait for a few more people to join in. While I'm doing that, I might as well. Okay. What's up, everybody? Um, Welcome. First of all, I kind of got obsessed with this process, and really started to dive into the timeline and try to make sense of it. And down here at the bottom, I'm just starting to kind of relate it to human psychology and the um, different stages of life, according to Carl Jung. So, um, but quickly before I go into this, um, I let me see here. There we go. Can make this a little bit bigger for y'all. There. Um, so yeah, I started to dive into this quite a bit, and um, I was listening to the creator Crunchy, who love his work. I love the way he approaches the lore and thinking about things and the effort and stuff he puts into it. Um, and I like that he streams a lot to kind of share his ideas collectively and kind of very much how I like to do things too. But it's funny because he a few months ago in his Discord said that he was going to create a video about Jungian psychology and how um, America seems to be uh, everybody is America theory is I think how he calls it. And then in his stream, just a couple days ago, he kind of circled on these ideas that we've been talking about for so long. And I thought it was really interesting because he's a creator that I really look up to. And the fact that he is starting to kind of come around to this and everything like that. So I reached out to him, and I don't know if any of you listen to him or watch him or whatever, but I reached out to him and I said I think it would be really, really cool to do some sort of stream together and collaborate about. He has such a rich understanding of the lore of the game, much better than I do, and I think we kind of counterbalance each other because I think um, my understanding of Jungian psychology, although it's very novice, you know, but I have been doing it for a year, and I've been reading a lot of books and a lot of articles and all this different type of stuff. So I reached out to him and said, hey, I'd love to, you know, do something with you and do a live stream together or collaborate or something like that because he seems to be getting interested in this concept. So, anywho, um, if you guys listen to him and reach out to him, bug him, make it happen. I think it'd be really cool. So, um, quick recap. Basically, how we see the game. We talked about this yesterday, actually, when we kind of built this timeline together, and since then I've added more and more to it. But hold on. Sorry about that. I had to help my wife with something really quick. Um, but, anyways, so the timeline that we created together, it starts with this very enigmatic, kind of more of an idea than anything else, called the One Great. Um, and it seems like this is, well, the only real description we get about it is that everything came from the One Great, and then after that came fractures, birth, souls, blah, 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 blah. And we know that the Frenzy Flame endings is trying to get back to this state. Um, so the One Great, whatever that looks like, we can kind of put an image to it just based off of the Frenzy Flame ending. So everything here in the One Great is united. So there's no divisions in anything. So all of the concepts of the game, of the lands between, of all this stuff, is existing within the One Great. And we also kind of posited that this is analogous to the Crucible and the Great Tree, where all of these different names for basically the same thing. So, like, the Crucible is where all life was once blended together, primordial form of the Erd Tree, all this. That's basically like what it means. So, dividing that from the One Great seems almost impossible to do. The One Great, all things came from there. Crucible, where it was just where all life was blended together. Clearly, the aspects of the Crucible and these types of things, like, there's no really division into things. Now, you could make the argument that the One Great is like the very beginning. It's almost like an instant in time, or outside of time, really. And you could say that it's kind of like the Big Bang almost, where it's that, and then from that we get what we get, and then the next stage would be the Crucible, where things are still kind of this androgynous soup, kind of formless life where everything is together. But it doesn't. I think for the purposes of the game and the lore, it doesn't necessarily matter. And then basically the next thing that happens that is, so let me take a step back. So within this kind of this time immemorial, as the game calls it, there seems to be where everything is blended together and there isn't really divisions and fractures. All of these different ways of life are happening, are coexisting together. So the ancestral spirits, the Crucible stuff, all this type of stuff, it seems to be existing at the same time, coexisting together. And that is up for debate because, again, there's no... This time seems very fluid. And then the thing that really sets things into motion is, it seems to be the greater will sending the Elden Beast via meteorite to the lands between. That seems to be the very beginning, and we also know that the Elden Beast is the concept of order and all this type of stuff, and there seems to be, this is where fractures and divisions start to take place. So a meteorite hits Farum Azula, is what it seems to be, and from this meteorite, it seems that the Elden Beast and the concept of order, all, faith and religion, the things that we see in the lands between, seem to take hold of the surface level of the lands between. And this game being a major concept of, one of its major concepts being duality, and as above, so below, It seems that at the same time, a meteorite hit, and whether so, in my mind, how I see this happening is I see it's one meteorite that hits, and it literally fractures the lands between into the top half and the bottom half. At the top half, you have the greater will, the Elden Beast, concept of order, faith, religion, all this different type of stuff. And the bottom half gets separated to more of a chaotic. The concept of chaos starts. I think the Dark Moon, as evidenced by the Nox and all that kind of stuff, intelligence and science, things that are the antithesis to the above happens below. So, in this kind of soup where all things exist, it seems to be that this is also the eternal cities is existing within the lands between, but there's nothing is in it. Seems to just be like this void, this darkness, all that kind of stuff. And the Elden Beast, the counter to that, the flip side of that, would be Estelle. I think that it just seems too messy to have two meteorites hit separately that are, one very much is like dwelling in the darkness and is associated with the occult and science, and then one is the opposite of that. It seems like that would happen at the same time, and just like everything else, when it fractures, it splits into halves and separates and is the opposites. Same, so too did this event. And then, so we know that this occurred in Farum Azula. So Farum Azula is where the dragons ruled. We know that at one point, Dragon Lord Placidusax had 5 heads, and when we see him, he has 2. And we also know that at some point, his god fled, and he is awaiting its return. And he is the Elden Lord to this god. And I am suggesting that the god of this era, right, where everything was one, pre-fractures, pre-Elden Beast, pre-Greater Will, all this type of stuff, was the self, capital S, where, I don't know why that's not, it's Melania, or it's Melina, it's pre the split between Marika and the Glowmite Queen. It's pre-ego and shadow split. It's the totality of Marika's psyche. It's everything as one. And then something happens, which, you know, I believe to be the birth of the ego and consciousness, but we'll get into that at a different time. Trying to stick with just very much just the themes of the game before applying any sort of Jungian psychology to it. But and then we also see, just as more evidence, we see this same type of order coming from Chaos Split happening in Farum Azula via the statue and the Elden Ring at that time. And it seems, so basically the horizontal line here, if it's kind of the soupy, primordial, everything united, it lives on that line, and then once the split happens, what happens above, there's a counterbalance to that is happening below. And that's kind of the way that it's split up. So with this split, we know that Placidusax's god has fled. I'm suggesting that it's the totality of the self aka Melina. But with that split comes the splits, and America is definitely chosen by the two fingers to be the queen that represents the greater will and the concept of order and all that kind of stuff. And then it seems that the shadow, right, or the counteract to that would be the Glomide Queen. Um, and one really interesting thing is, in the Glomide Queens, in the I think it's the one of the Black Flame incantations. It says that the Glomide Queen led the apostles. It is said that she was an Empyrean chosen by the fingers. And almost every other mention that talks about Empyreans, it mentions two fingers. So I think the ambiguity of the word the fingers rather than chosen by the two fingers suggests that she was actually chosen by the three fingers to represent the more chaotic dark side, to be that the counterbalance needed in the world. So here's Ronnie. She's talking. This is a quote from her where she's talking about how she became an Empyrean, and it said each of us was chosen by our own two fingers as a candidate to succeed Queen America to become the new god of the coming age. So this is just an example of when the combination of Empyreans and fingers are mentioned. It's almost exclusively the two fingers, with the exception of the Glomide Queen. So, and this is just a furthering of that concept of as above, so below, right? So, at this point, there seems to be this balance in the world of things happening above the surface and the concept of order, and then kind of the flip side of that, things happening what I'm saying is below the surface, but that's just to make it, I think, visually more easy to see. Is happening within the Glomide Queen and the actions that she is doing. We know that during this time, right? Who knows how long that this period is, but beastmen start to gain intelligence and start building more and more sophisticated civilizations. So from the beginning, the One Great, the Crucible, and the Great Tree, and all this type of stuff, where life is blended together, everything is coexisting, there's no fractures or divisions. The strike of the meteor, it fractures the world literally, and then the two gods of those two domains seem to take hold. And so is born the duality of what we see. The things happening above the surface at that point seem to be that the beastmen from Fair Missoula start to gain knowledge and start to build more and more sophisticated civilizations. And then what seems to happen below the surface, right, is the Glomide Queen starts to kind of build her army of the Godskin apostles, and they also have, the form that is not unlike the Crucible. Just kind of, it gives us a date to put when they, kind of where they came from and how they are represented in the world. It seems to be this during this time. Also during this time is the ice dragons were dominant in the mountaintops. They were once lords of the mountaintops long ago, until they were defeated by the fire giants and chased from the peak. And then, so again, you're starting to see the duality, so fire and ice, and then this seems to be an ongoing war of mask worn by knights of Zamor, hailed as heroes in the war against the giants. These long-lived warriors, clad in biting, freezing winds, are said to have been the mortal enemies of the fire giants since time immemorial. Cloaked in an icy tempest, the Knights of Zamor have challenged the fire giants since ancient times. So, although the war was won, they still seem to be kind of at this eternal battle between the Knights of Zamor and fire giants. That is kind of this ongoing conflict during this time, it seems. So it seems that the Beastmen, however long this is, building more and more sophisticated religion or civilizations, ended up, that kind of culminates in the Ul and Ul dynasties. So the map of the rivers, it says two great rivers flow beneath the lands between the Shofria and Ansel. The vast region is said to have been the grave of civilizations that flourished before the Erd Tree. So again, this is just civilizations pre-Erd Tree where they're becoming more and more civilized, they're becoming more and more orderly, but it's before the Erd Tree and it's before this kind of dominant force and way of life that we see in the game. And the biggest figure that we know of is so beautifully coined Elden John, this kind of Moses figure where he's holding and clutching a tablet that is split in half, and at his feet is a tablet that he seems to have discarded. And we know moving forward, in the four belfries, he is kind of at the top of the great tree or the Erd Tree or whatever it is at that point, which to me suggests that at some point, right, breaking off from here, humanity continued to evolve, beginning to follow the doctrine of faith and order specifically, and a tree prophesized by this man, and they make their way to the surface. And I think that is why you see this man at the top of the surface clutching this thing, is because here we are having the followers of order and faith and religion and all those types of concepts make their way to the light, right? Make their way to the surface of the lands between, and it seems that those who do not are condemned to kind of the eternal cities that existed from the very beginning. They seem to be housed underneath the surface with no sky, with no light, and eternal darkness because they go against the current kind of status quo. Just make sure I'm not missing any comments here. I don't think so. And we see this from kind of the astrologers, because the astrologers predate sorcerers and all this kind of stuff. I don't know if they necessarily predate the Nox, but Nox and sorcery kind of go hand in hand. So seems that this division kind of, there was a subset of people that made it to the surface, but then kind of continued their scientific inquiry, leading to cloning, AI, sorcery, all this different type of stuff that is deemed heretical to the followers of faith, basically. Long ago, the Nox invoked the ire of the greater will and were banished deep underground. They live under a false sky in anticipation of their liege of the coming age of stars, the Lord of Night. So this very much is almost identical to how the Illuminati started, The Illuminati are like the enlightened ones, and they were kind of the revolutionary minds of that given time. So scientists and artists and all this type of stuff that didn't fit perfectly with um, the dominant religion at the time, that made faith in God questionable and put God further and further or put God in a smaller and smaller box. Were literally driven underground and kind of made this secret society. So I kind of I took a stab at what those events mean. So science makes God slash faith more and more irrelevant, which was this provoking of the greater will's ire, right? So, and I think that specifically, I think what that was the silver tears, the mimics, these types of things, because when when people start creating life, it really makes people question. Okay, so if we can create life, what exactly is the role of God? Um, and if we can create artificial life, that is, I'm not just saying like if we have biological creating life in a natural way, but if we are able to through science and through the laws of nature, if we're able to create life on our own without a God, without faith, and without religion, then what exactly is the purpose of faith? What is the purpose of this God who we deem, and when I say we, I'm just saying like society at this time, to be the more old school, like man in the sky, created everything, just have faith in me, kind of Old Testament God. Um, so um, basically, what's happening with the Nox by creating life is that we are becoming our own gods. So, or the Nox are becoming their own gods. So, by becoming your own god, you are killing the idea of a god. And I think that this is um, the reason that they're banished, and the reason that the god slaying or the finger slaying um, blade is born of a corpse, is because I think it's literally the destruction of, it's the killing of the idea of a god. So um, that's how I am interpreting it, anyways. And as I said here, which is, this goes pretty deep and far, but Blade being born of a corpse could represent the catalyst of creating artificial life, aka America's stillbirth, which we've talked about on this channel a lot. And that could be the spark that lights the fires of doubt. Um, we know that America comes, from the same civilization. They're Newman and all this kind of stuff. Um, so it's almost like an aspect of her is having doubts about the their just unquestioned blind faith in the the greater will, basically. Um, there's no timeline really for when this happens, so it's just kind of this could literally be anywhere within the timeline. But I put it here just because there seems to be this rising out of the inner works of the lands between, um, where civilization continues to grow and continues to get more and more orderly, and we see a man holding the new way of life. They make it to the surface, and from there it seems to be like a split happens where blind faith and religion and incantations are the dominant way of thinking. Anything that is uh, against that thought gets driven underground and kind of tucked away. Yeah. Um, Tablet the Man's Foot is the Amigo Imago Mundi depicting the map of Mesopotamia. Visually seen it spelled Illuminati. Interesting because Illuminati. I thought that was weird too, actually. Um, it's a metal that does. Sorry. Drawing parallels to aluminum, there's an alloy of aluminum and gold that is purple, like gravity magic, and fragile. Oh, that's really interesting. So it shatters easily. Also, aluminum is a metal that does not tarnish, unlike other metals. Wow, that's really interesting. Hmm. I wonder what the kind of implications of that. Um, because we know that from these eternal cities, the kind of resurfacing of that happens at Celia, and Celia seems to be where gravity magic is either found, or it's definitely seems to be harnessed at there from alabaster lords and things like that. Um, and then also a timeline that is really fuzzy is the when exactly the Academy of Ray Lucaria happens. Um, there's no like description that gives us a certain time frame. So I just kind of put it up here in like this who knows, like it probably happened pre-Erdtree, but it's really hard to um, put a date on that one. Um, and then I just put this quote in here by Jung that says, "No tree, it is said, can go to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell," and that's by Jung. So I put this here because there seems to be the timeline seems to at this point the what's happening above the surface seems to be happening equally below the surface. And this balance in the world seems to be more or less in place. And then enter Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, at least America. Um, and we all know that his role is very much destroy anything in the opposition of the Erdtree. And this is kind of where this balance seems to really um, go away, and it tips heavily in favor of everything happening above the surface, kind of in the light of the Erdtree. Um, so Godfrey, we command your deeds, guidance to deliver you through the ordeal, blah blah blah. Put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mount. Let a new epoch begin, an epoch glistening with life. Branch the Elder Ring for the age of the Erdtree. So this kind of new age that we're in, that goes all the way to the end there, is the age of the Erdtree. And within the age of the Erdtree is I put the Golden Order and all this different type of stuff because again the timeline for those things is it just seems to be really hard to put a set timeline on them. Um, so Godfrey and America kind of dominate the world landscape. They at this point in time, the Erdtree is definitely the number one kind of pillar of faith. It is how you're supposed to live your life, all this different type of stuff. America actually says in one of her echoes, I forget exactly, but she basically says like you're either gonna follow the way of the Erd Tree or you're gonna be condemned. And she says the Erd Tree governs all, the choice is thine, become one with the order or divest itself of it, to wallow at the fringes of powerless upstart. So that's kind of a good one, one phrase to explain the exactly what is happening during this time. Also during this time, there seems to be Malekith defeats the Glowmite Queen, seals away destined death, which from just a description and definition of the Golden Order, you could say that this is when the Golden Order started, because the Golden Order starts with the plucking of the Rune of Death. Have no idea in the grand scheme of things when exactly that happened, but that doesn't really matter, because by doing so, it seems that there is this gigantic kind of missing shadow side of the Erd Tree, where the Glowmite Queen and the Black Flame, Destined Death, all this different type of stuff are gone. So, and who knows for how long, right? Like there's no real way to put in terms when this happened, but and then at the same time, the apostles kind of scatter, and I kind of wonder if this is going to be the DLC, is like this huge missing gap, because it seems like nothing is happening here in game that we see, but there's definitely a shadow side. So America is just kind of unaware of it, if that makes sense. So it's like very much in her unconsciousness. She's repressing it and is choosing not to see it. But the shadow of the Erd Tree and kind of where Horaloo seems to die in the Badlands is they seem to be in similar places. And I don't know if that was intentional or if I'm reading into it, but it seems that this anything outside the purview of the lands between that I've kind of said before seems to be this more shadow side, the unconscious, all this different type of stuff, because we know that up here, Horaloo, defeats everything, does what he's supposed to do, and then he gets robbed of his grace and is hounded from the lands between. And the lands between, wherever that is, the Badlands, the land of reeds, it all seems to be the same term for the unconsciousness of America. Like, it's just kind of like this very much repressed. I'm not thinking about it. I'm not. It's not in my awareness. All that kind of stuff. So. And then obviously during this time frame, America and Godfrey have 3 children: Godwyn, Moog, and Morgoth. I'm not really going to dive too much into the complexities of what each character does. This is more of like a grand, the main plot of the game timeline, because it would just get way too much. But they had 3 kids, or 3 children, 3 offspring together. And then at some point later on, during this time when the Erd Tree is at its kind of age of plenty, all that kind of stuff, the Misbegotten and Omen and Crucible Knights, all these different types of things that are, as Marika said, not part of order. They still hold within them the aspects of kind of this crucible, chaotic mess. They get either enslaved or they get imprisoned, or like the Crucible Knights just kind of get they almost get hounded away as well. They're kind of driven to the fringes. All of these things that are not within the purview of societal expectations get mistreated, basically. And then, after some time, there seems to be the resurfacing of the more occult of the Nox, of science, via Celia. So Celians are descendants of the Eternal. So way back, the Eternal Cities seem to be this emptiness space that the Nox were kind of imprisoned to. And then the Nox just kind of kept doing their thing for God knows how long. And then there seems to be this resurfacing of almost that doubt of it's what I would consider a resurfacing of the outer god of the moon, and it comes through via the Celians. Again, there's no super clear idea, but of time, but at this time, it seems like Renala is kind of the queen of the full moon, is the queen of the Academy and of the Carians, and then I need to kind of go. Where is what do I do with that? Oh, I kind of have it up here, but so when Godfrey is stripped of his grace, he becomes the first of the Tarnished, him and his followers, and he starts the long march of the Tarnished. And it seems that he goes from the Smoldering Church to Castle Morn and Weeping Peninsula, and then leaves. And then there's one hero that stays back, blah, 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 blah. And of all the echoes that are spoken, there's only one where Radigan is present, and it's in the Weeping Peninsula at the Church of Pilgrimage. And it seems that the exit of Godfrey is the beginning of Radigan, is what it seems to be. This is a little bit of a kind of tangent here, but so Godfrey gets hounded, enter Radigan. We kind of know Radigan's history. He makes his way to the capital. He fights the First and Second Liurnian Wars, and he becomes a hero. And then after the Second War, there's not going to be a victor, so he marries Renala. And he repents his territorial transgressions through celestial dew, which is found in the Eternal City. Kind of interesting that this resurfacing of these the lost eternal are kind of coexist with this newfound the hidden tears of the Nox. So um, and then together, it seems that Radigan and Renala have 3 children. Again, not going to go super deep into them, um, but at this point, Radigan learns sorceries, and the next thing we know is that Renala is kind of this former husk of herself, and she is seems to be completely obsessed with this um, birthing a child, and is very much depressed and all this different type of stuff. And there is no explanation as to why. It seems that before this union with Radigan, she was very powerful and wise and respected, and then after it, she was just not the same person. Um, so at this point, um, the there seems to have been some time during this kind of area. Um, there seems to be a crisis of faith within America. Um, she talks about how she's going to look into it. That the blissful days of blind faith are no longer. So something happens to her that makes her question her actions and the blind faith that she has in the greater will, in the concept of order, in faith, all this kind of stuff. And what's interesting is that you hear these words at the smoldering church, um, which is a really awesome way to, like, for Miyazaki to say it's almost like she's setting the church on fire. Like, her blind faith in this religion is no longer the case. And this also where she gets rid of Godfrey, like the sword monument right next to the smoldering church. Says Lord Godfrey at his last at his end of his campaign, golden armies unvanquished and unbowed, yet finds grace lost, tattered and faded. So this seems to be the area that is represented by this crisis of faith that is happening to America. And I trying really hard not to go into Carl Jung, but one really important aspect of the psyche that Carl Jung talks about is when you repress your animus for a woman, or as a man, if you repress your anima, it will. He says it will marry your shadow. Um, let's see here. Right here. So if you are unconscious of your animus, it will marry your shadow. And by sending Godfrey, who I consider to represent her animus, and be hounded from the lands between, and to go outside of the lands between and away, it seems that she is sending him to her unconscious and repressing that aspect of herself. Because he, at that point, long march from the smoldering church to Castle Morn, and basically just sails off from the Weeping Peninsula. And one thing that I think what we're seeing is we're seeing America being presented to us in the form of Renala as her shadow. Um, so so basically, what seems to be happening is the repressed qualities of America pre this crisis of faith seem to come to life in the form of Queen Renala. And the Liurnian Wars seem to be this battle between the ego and the shadow, where there isn't really a clear winner. And because at this time she hounds Godfrey, her animus, from the lands between, repressing him, it seems that the second stage of her animus, aka Radagon, marries Renala, and from that marriage is birthed these three kind of really troublesome quote unquote children of theirs. We know what Ronnie ends up doing. Blasphemy seems to be represented in Rykard, and this kind of beastly fear of change creature that is Radon is also one of these offspring of this marriage. And it's also so all of these things happening together where this animus marries kind of the enemy within, the shadow, and the birth of that is Ronnie of the Dark Moon and Rykard trying to kill all the gods and all this different type of stuff is really hard to ignore. And then not only that, but then we see that Renala, who was once the Queen of the Full Moon, is now, she kind of blesses Ronnie to move to the more occult Dark Moon. So the moon that was encountered by young Ronnie, led by the hand of her mother Renala. So it seems like, again, like this shadow is kind of showing the way of their offspring of how exactly to quote unquote kill the gods. So I thought that was a interesting tidbit there. But so what comes out of this, and I think that this could also be why America is having such a crisis of faith, is like this theme of being barren or not being able to have children, or having your children be miscarriaged or stillborn or whatever it is, because the theme of cradling this egg and wanting children, all this kind of stuff, persists throughout. And it seems that has to be the crisis of faith that we see come to life. So, and we've kind of talked about this before, but the Lake Arad is right under Liurnia and the Academy. So, I don't need to talk about that right now, but and then what we see happen, and kind of the flip side, is Golden Order fundamentalism is created, where it's both faith and intelligence, and we're starting to see the beginning of this kind of rebalancing in the world, and it coexists with America kind of saying she's going to look into the Golden Order. The days of blind faith are gone. The smoldering church, and the shatter. We know that when Radigan leaves, she says, "When you get here, we're gonna shatter together." Basically, um, I have no idea how much time passes between then, but she makes it very clear that that is her plan. So she already knows. So something happened to her pre her joining with Radigan, um, where she knows that she is going to shatter the Elden Ring, which means that this crisis of faith has already taken place. And I think we're seeing that play out in her shadow via Renala. But um, and then this is kind of where I this is how far I made it, but um, it seems that fast forward, it seems that the offspring of Radigan America are Melania and Mikola, and I believe Melania represents America's kind of shadowy state of depression and distress, and more of her the things that she needs to let go of, and Mikola is like what America is trying to become, America 2.0 at the end of this um, individuation period. Um, and it's no coincidence that the Halleck tree and kind of the age of Mikola is coming out of the head of the child in the map, where it's like it's this new way of thinking, it's this new way outlook on life, all this different type of stuff at the end of the process of individuation. So um, and then I put this in here because I thought it was an interesting. So Radon um, becomes obsessed with keeping his horse with him. Basically, the fear of change is what is his driving force, and he uses gravity to make that happen. And gravity is the pull of two things coming together. So I kind of wondered if Radon was supposed to be the symbol of this law of regression kind of come to life, where he is resisting change, and that's kind of like his whole character is just stopping things. My son's crying. But that's kind of, I mean, there's a lot that I need to add into there, but that's kind of how I got into it. Hey, I appreciate that. Hey, Taylor. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Mearshroom. I agree. I think it's. I was really hesitant about because when I first came, kind of when I first started making the connections between Jung and the game, it's not that people were like, um, "There's no way this is happening," but I tried really, really hard to make sense of the game without applying America and the aspects of America to the like the main characters, and it made the Renala Radigan marriage and their offspring and what we know about. So Enya says that the demigods are each and all the direct offspring of Queen America herself. And then we also know that Empyreans are born of a single lord or of a single god. Um, and if if you try to make sense out of all of these really counterintuitive, like they're almost bickering at each other because it doesn't make any sense until you apply this more. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it is, Kim. Um, so when I was going through the timeline, I was trying to make sense of things. When I applied that that quote by Jung to what we're seeing with Renal and Radigan, the result of that just seemed to be a lot more of a clear picture of exactly what is happening in like the results that come from that and the children that and the way that and the things that their children are doing too. Um, Radigan has a line with the Onyx Lords too. Is he? Help me out with that one, Taylor. While you're doing that, so there's a lot more to fill in. Like, I still need to go through kind of the events that we're seeing unfold as far as post us defeating Radon, um, the journey that we take, and then basically how we become Elden Lord. But I wanted to begin the process of mirroring, or not necessarily mirroring it, right? Because that's not a super honest way to go about it. But from the timeline of Elden Ring, the game, and the lore that we see, if I create a timeline of the stages of human development from a psychological standpoint, um, do they reflect one another? Because if they don't, then I am making connections that aren't there. And if they do, then we can further our claim of this seems really to be, in fact, at least heavily designed by Jungian psychology. So I've very quickly kind of dug into some of my books and some of the resources that I use and started this process. So what's really interesting is that um, Jung divides the stages of development into four different stages, which is really interesting because there's four churches of America. There's four stages of animist development. There's four steps in the magnum opus. There's four stages in the process of individuation. So I just thought it seemed very apt to what we're seeing play out in game. So first off, the unconscious is referred to as the Great One. And that, I mean, for that to be kind of the first thing is like, is very telling, I think. Oh, his Onyx Sword was a teacher, can't remember the item, but he has pull magic, not push magic. Are you talking about Radon or Radigan? Hang on, I might have this backwards. Yeah, no worries. Take your time, man. Um, and another descriptor for the unconscious is the unconscious is where all things are united. Um, which makes sense, right? Because the unconscious is like, it is like this formless, like, place where everything is housed. Um, where there lives no such thing as like judgment, as fractures, as all this type of stuff. It's just like who we are at our core, um, regardless of what we tell ourselves and how we present ourselves. It's just who we are. Um, so the first stage is here. Do I have it? Is infancy to early childhood. So, and Jung calls this the anarchaic or chaotic state. in this first stage, the child is still in the unconscious state. One second. So I try and do these when my son is napping. He usually takes like a 3 hour nap, and today he decided to take like a hour-long nap. So this might be cut short, like so many of mine are. But I can quickly go get through this little chunk. But so in this first stage, the child is still in the unconscious state. So that means that there has been no ego or persona development. They are just who they are, right? Like they are their true, authentic self, capital S. There's no divisions or fractures. They are at harmony with every single thing that is happening within their psychology. Jung often states that the goal of the process of individuation is to get us back into that more childhood state of conscious, like of consciousness slash unconsciousness. So to be at one with oneself, to be your true authentic self without judgments and stripping part of yourself away because it's what you would consider undesirable to either yourself or to society. So so I'm getting, just so you all know, I should probably source this, but I'm getting this. And another really interesting thing is that it's Jung calls these stages, kind of the totality of it, stages of life from sunrise to sunset. So the fact that Fair Missoula is kind of locked in this eternal sunrise, which I talked about in my first video, is also like another like, okay, well, we're probably we're probably onto something here, right? And here you kind of get within these four stages, he also kind of he breaks it up into the first half of life and the second half of life. The first half being very much about building your persona and your ego, and the second half, or what he would consider external focus, and the second half is this internal focus, this process of individuation. So, just wanted to give you guys kind of a reference as to what I'm citing and sourcing, but it's actually a really cool read. But so another quote from that paper is that the baby is naturally confined in the nursery, interacting only with the caregivers. Since this interaction of the baby is limited, their awareness can be described as sporadic. It is unable to form chronological memories. This explains why, in general, people find it difficult to remember the events that happened to them when they were infants. Jung refers to this as an island of memory. And if that is not fair Missoula, like, dude, don't know what is. Taylor, yeah, it was Alabaster. Yep, for Radon. Yeah, like these things that we're seeing in Fair Missoula, um, are definitely in a chaotic state in the unconsciousness, as I've described before, with dragons kind of being like the primary figure for the the unconsciousness, and then these beastmen who you could relate to, where America is in this very instinctive, unconscious thought pattern, and she slowly gains knowledge, she slowly gains consciousness, she slowly gains the concept of ego and persona, all this different type of stuff. And then another quote about this first stage, and there's a lot more. I mean, I barely scratched the surface, but the psychology of the baby and psychology of the parents, particularly the mothers, are undifferentiated. The parents act as the ego for the baby, as the baby has yet to develop their own. And throughout, one of the really, really random things about Fair Missoula is that there seems to be this gigantic jump. If this is what they're trying to display, is we go from beastmen to basically human civilization, there seems to be this gigantic leap from beastmen to these statues that look like a royal family, with the mother holding the baby and the father separated from them, all this different type of stuff. When applying this as what we're seeing is the inner workings of America's first stage of life, as her as an infant and, you know, kind of toddler years, where she is one and the same, especially with her mother, and she is operating in this unconscious realm, and the fact that her memories are, like, as Jung says, an island of memories, and that's what we see with Fair Missoula. And what we know with how the Elden Ring looks, and the separation between the wolves and the little girl, and the fact that it's the meteorite that hits Fair Missoula, and all this different type of stuff. I mean, I only got maybe, out of this whole thing, I probably read that. It's almost like the script for the game, obviously with, like, their own artistic flair to it. I literally just got that description, was just all of that. And then in the next one, monarchaic is the ego that forms, right? And that leads into dualistic state, where that separates himself and he forms his ego. And if, again, like, if that does not describe that, where it's the unconscious and the ego forming out of it, and the unconscious and the ego forming out of that, it would take a lot. I mean, it would take a lot for me to see it a different way. I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts on it, because I, like, as much as I try not to be biased, it's because I've been doing this for a year, you know, very much on and off. I think my brain naturally sees things, so I'm really curious for you guys if the events that are happening. I mean, even in this little tiny section, right? Like, the very, very beginnings are making sense as far as a reflection of human psychology. And if so, why? And if why not? If so, I'd love to hear why. And if you disagree, I'd also love to hear why. Nothing. 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 Um, I this was kind of the only thing I wanted to talk about today. Um, I will probably take a few days to fill this out more from both the just the lore of the game and then also from a psychological standpoint, the stages of development, and then maybe present a much more full timeline with both of them. Um, I think you're generally making good connections. That would kind of. So, are you saying that you feel like I'm missing something? Um, but yeah, I think I'll probably just keep working on this kind of in the background. I'll keep streaming just my kind of playthrough, and keep gathering information and blah 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 blah. And then once this is done, probably in a week or so, kind of come back to it. But yeah, I was I was pretty excited to just get this out and at some point there may be a switch to subverting classic Jungian psychology, but there's so little to work with. The early timeline. This is a fair framework. At some point there may be a switch to subverting classic Jungian. Yeah, I mean, yeah. The real issue is that um, because the game is so cryptic and designed to be a mystery. I mean, Miyazaki said himself that like he intentionally takes things out, and he has a story in his head, but he wants um, the players to kind of make up their own. So he takes a lot of things out. So yeah, I don't think there's going to be anything that like is kind of a one size fits all necessarily. Um, like Ferrum Azula's infancy childhood sound. And the fact that like during this stage, um, the ego splits, um, creating the shadow, and that this is where we find Malekith. Um, there's just so much. It's clean and sound interpretation of the story. It's hard for me to disagree. Thank you, Taylor. Yeah, I'm excited to see kind of where this ends up. Um, yeah. Mm-mm-mm. All right. Um, Probably gonna have to hop off here, guys. Yeah, yeah. I think my very first one, I said that I kind of made the hunch that because childhood traumas seem to follow us everywhere and to kind of um, shape how we think, that the fact that Farum Azula and the ruins are literally everywhere within the lands between, that has to represent, like Farum Azula would have to represent America's childhood. Um, yeah, yeah, I think, and I think that definitely still fits. I think it's almost even more we have a better, more thorough understanding of it now, I would say, than I did a year ago when I kind of made that hypothesis. And you know, I've I've kind of one thing that I'm really struggling kind of getting a good grasp on is when and why America sealed destined death. Um, like, is it something from her childhood that you know trauma that was trauma that when she grew up she said I'm not having this in my life and plucked death kind of out of her psyche? Is it just the very natural human condition that you know thinking about death and the natural fear of death that people often pluck from their psyche? Is it more of a religious connotation where it's talking about how there is no death in faith kind of theme? um, that that's a very elusive thought to me, and maybe it doesn't matter at all. Like, this could very much be one of those things where Miyazaki makes so vague that it's like, well, why would you? You know, maybe it's my own personal. Hey, Blee, what's up? What's up? Yeah, yeah, and it could just be just that. I mean, it is a game that needs to be entertaining for the masses, right? So, like, there are certain things that are just supposed to be fun, or like you're saying, more fantastical. So we can try desperately to um, attach meaning to it, right? But there might not be a clear cut meaning to it. Um, what might be interesting actually is to just kind of read the next little bit of this paper, and see where we can see where it takes us. I think that would probably be kind of interesting. So we talked about the childhood as the more chaotic state, and how it's still in its more infancy, um, very much acting in a purely unconscious state, whereas it's almost directly connected to the parents. And one thing that another thing that I've always kind of struggled with was the War of the Giants, um, and exactly what that is supposed to represent. Um, like I almost like I'm trying to. I almost think that the War on the Giants is her parents. It's her separating herself from her parents, um, and you can't like kill that, right? Like you can't sever that completely. but you can quote unquote defeat it and become your own individual person separate from your parents. Um, I've always wondered, like, if, because when you think of like the giants of our psyche, right, like the figures, your parents have to be the biggest, most dominant force there is. Um, but anyways, so we covered this first more chaotic state, infancy, and then monarchaic, the ego starting to form. The child learns to speak, but refers to himself in the third person. It's a much more primitive ego. The islands of memory become larger, but the child is not yet aware of himself as the perceiver. It's interesting to note that there are quite a number of conflicting literature or speaking about yourself in the third person. Some say it's a positive trait, blah, 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 blah. And then from basically the ego starting to form, it's a very primitive ego. Then the next stage within this childhood development is dualistic state. As a child learns to separate himself from the rest of the world, he forms his ego, and there arises a sense of I. So the child starts to speak of himself in the first person. Memories start to develop chronologically. In other words, the islands of consciousness or memories become continents. That's a very interesting so as the ego develops, and the child is able to recognize itself as I, the memories become chronological, start to make a lot more sense, and the island now becomes continents. Yeah, I figure the giants as parents, giant ominous skulls, landscape Khaled, watch fly. The parents, oh, that's such a great, yeah, that's a really great connection. And then the continents that form are in the form of this child. And kind of as we've talked about before, like the first Church America is here, the second one is a little bit further down, the third one's a little bit further down, and then the fourth one is all the way down, in the Weeping Peninsula. So if the memories and continents are becoming chronological, then this would be, the stages are represented in these different areas. So first, second, third, and then fourth would be like the feet. So this dualistic state seems to be ego separates from self. I cannot For the love of me, spell anything correctly. And then, according to Jung, very young children are still connected with the collective unconscious, which comprises the archetypes, mythologies, or big dreams of mankind. This dreamy mystical realm, interesting kind of, is beyond empirical data, which is why this is not a very popular research topic. To academics, that emphasize the importance of mythic metaphors. Mankind connect with their inner consciousness. Not surprising, therefore, that fairy tales and magical worlds appeal greatly to children. So, for practicality's sake, children would need to outgrow these big dreams as they become adults. Blah 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 blah. In the childish stage of consciousness, there are as yet no problems. Nothing depends on the subject. For the child itself is wholly dependent on its parents. It's as though we are not completely born. We are still enclosed in a psychic atmosphere of the parents. Interesting. I like the streamy mystical realm. It, like, when you think of Fair Missoula, it's very much that kind of like you get that sense of it. Right. I think that the churches are related, specifically to the development of Godfrey as animus. Yeah, but you can't have one without the other. Um, like, as as the animus, like, so if America doesn't develop, right, then the the makeup of her psyche doesn't develop. So us seeing Godfrey as the animus develop means that America herself is in development. So you can't really, it can't be, they can't be separated. But overall development is opposite direction of Mountaintop's Fair Missoula, Caleb Limgrave. What makes you say that? Why do you think that the overall development is opposite directions? Yeah, but those the multiple stages, they're only in the same stage together, right? So it's not like um, they can't be in separate stages, if that makes sense. They follow the same path of development. Yeah. Oh boy. Placiducex originates in Fair Missoula, Horlu, and Liurnia. Radigan and Altus. Um, I would agree with all those, but Horlu. Why do you think Horlu comes from Liurnia? Is there something I'm missing? Like if your above comment was that you think the churches are related specifically to the Animus, the first the first one is in the mountaintop, so the giants. He has an accent from the region south of Wales. So South Liurnia? What? Oh, dude, I mean, that is yeah, um but that's like, man, that's a lot to put the origins of, like, Ronnie and Blade makes sense because like they're literally in Liurnia. Um but it seems like everything surrounding Godfrey was like, okay, hold on. Um Everything surrounding Godfrey is like his main thing was defeating the giants, and like the first church being there and it representing Godfrey. And that's a I would need a lot more than his accent. He's a Horlu type scoundrel. He's a Horlu type scoundrel. What the? I don't even know what that means. Um, and Bogart travels up to Altus with us. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. I don't know what Horlu type scoundrel means, but I I'm struggling with you saying that the churches are related specifically to the development of the animus, and then you're kind of contradicting that with the fact that you say Godfrey is from Liurnia. Um, I just kind of want to read a little bit more. Um, so it might be worth reading this a little bit. So, sunrise is considered the first half of life, birth to early adulthood. The task of the human being is outer development, or the initiation into outward reality. This means that for Jung, when a child is born, he has to undergo the process of detaching himself from the Garden of Eden, or the unconscious instinct just existence sloth state. The job here is to develop a persona that would allow humans to function productively in society. Persona means a mask or an image that we attach to ourselves. It is the face that we show the world. A healthy persona adapts, is balanced, unique, able to deal with tensions, seek out solutions, approach problems, blah, 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 blah. Basically, finding your place under the sun. Youth or puberty, so the psychic dependency on the parents is broken. The youth desires to establish his personal identity rather than piggyback on his own parents' ego. Most children rebel at this stage. The stricter the parents become, the more rebellious the child gets. This is the first time the individual has to deal with tensions arising from the environment. Adolescent crisis, the onset of psychological changes, raging hormones, and sexual identity marks the beginning of problems. Individual may take a hard time adjusting to the demands of life. If it's unresolved, those who are not able to break free from the shadows of their parents rebel inwardly, often nurturing a deep resentment that they are not allowed to grow up. This is also a manifestation of the midlife crisis. We've kind of attached because Horlu doesn't become Godfrey the Animus until founding the First Church of America. Animus until founding the First Church. Yeah, I think we just disagree on this. Like Horlu, I don't really know how to explain this. Horlu is always the animus of this first stage. And just like America, like you're never in complete stasis. Like just because you're in first stage doesn't mean like you just sit still until second stage happens, right? Like it's like you're running a race. Just because you're at mile 1 and you haven't gotten mile 2, you could be at 1.9 and not hit mile 2 yet, if that makes sense. So Horlu is also developing alongside America. So Horlu becoming Godfrey is just the first stage, like still developing. Just like Radagon goes through a bunch of different developmental stages, right? Like, it's not like he only becomes the Animus when he gets married or they join in the Erd Tree. Like, he is the second stage. So whether he's conjoined or not, he is the second stage. Um, we've talked about how the second stage of the Animus is like this man of romance, and we kind of connected the second church of America to like her, like kind of this stage of youth and puberty, because it's all about blood and roses, and we kind of know the history of Miyazaki with menstruation and those concepts, and I think it's really apt that at this time, kind of the golden order seems to be established, via Radigan. Like she is, she has defeated her parents, aka the giants. She has kind of separated herself from her, and at this stage, she is becoming even more of an individual, um, and making more of an ego and persona for herself. And it's at this point, I'm assuming it's at this point that she puts the moniker of like Queen Eternal on there. She's no longer Queen America; she's Queen America, the Eternal. So she's like adding this layer to herself in this stage. Um, Young explained that there is something in people that wishes to remain a child, to be unconscious, or conscious only of the ego, to reject everything strange, to do nothing or else indulge our own craving for pleasure or power. Childhood memories tempt people to prefer the easy, go lucky, egotistic lifestyle, making them avoid responsibility, abandon the quest for development, because that's a lot of work. Individuals who feel entitled, and blah, 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 blah. Individuals forced to realize what it means to rise and shine. As problems start to bear weight, there are those who would refuse to adapt and embrace innovations. These types prefer to regress in the comfort of their childhood years. That sounds, I, that sounds almost word for word what is happening with Radon. As problems start to bear weight, there are those who would refuse to adapt and embrace innovations, prefer to regress in the comfort of their childhood years. That is a sign that an individual is not comfortable with learning new things, which can become quite problematic since learning is a constant while alive. And then there's opposite, those who are quite ahead of the game and live in the future. If this is overrated, the individual might be running away from the past. Both strategies make people avoid confronting their problems, when they should be dealing with them. Hmm. And then, so that's kind of the first half. And then the second half, midlife happens around 35 or 40, metaphorically, as the clock strikes noon. The descent begins. The morals, ideals, and convictions that people value would need to be evaluated, but this can be difficult for stubborn folks. Young said it's not a good idea to adhere to old convictions as one empties the cup. Another metaphor he used. Using the sunrise sunset model, there are ideals that are healthy to pursue in the morning, but not at all worth pursuing in the afternoon. The time is nigh to loosen the grip on one and open oneself to activities that involve more humanistic objectives. And a care for future generations. Middle age, the process of individuation commences here. This is the process by which a person becomes a psychological individual, a separate indivisible unity, or whole, recognizing his innermost uniqueness. Becoming one's own self, or self-realization, which he distinguished from ego-centeredness. In other words, the ego takes a back seat as the person embraces a holistic worldview, integrates life's lessons, appreciates the grand design of things through inclusive activities designed to form deeper connections with the self and others. Hmm. Yeah. Megalomania. Rodano's regression as childhood sounds appropriate. Megalomania try to run away together and reject golden order fundamentalism, but can't because they don't know enough about their own past or what to run away from. Interesting. Well, Moog kind of lets them know. their past quickly catches up with them. Um, Midlife crisis. Adults start to question the relevance of their career and relationships. Um, I feel like this is what America says when she's going to look into the Golden Order. There are those clinging to their principles and convictions to the point that they totally close their minds to suggestions. These people are the intolerant adults we meet at work. Their relationships suffer, their goals are always frustrated. Some adults remain in their youth state because they still live in the shadows of their parents. Individuals with unresolved adolescent crises, blah, 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 blah. Midlife crises is also characterized as the paranoia one feels towards aging because the present circumstance point to a bleak future. Interesting. Um, that was a pretty insightful read. Um, I need to find like a more thorough breakdown of it, but um, yeah, interesting. Um, yeah, so kind of like I said, I'm gonna continue to build out both of these timelines, um, and then while I'm doing that, I'll keep doing my playthrough and streaming that stuff. But yeah, this is helping a lot with actually like the script of the video that I'm making and things like that. Just bringing to light a bunch of things. So yeah, as always, guys, if you haven't already, if you would be so kind as to hit that like button, it goes a long way for me. So, and then subscribe and all that kind of stuff, so that way you know when I'm going live next. I'll probably be live tomorrow at some point to just kind of stream the game and chit chat and shit like that. But stay tuned for kind of a more developed timeline for both human development and the game. And then, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, for some of you that weren't here, I'm trying to do a collab with Crunchy. because he's starting to circle this whole young concept and stuff like that, and America's everybody and blah 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 blah. So if you watch his stuff, or if you have a direct line to him somehow, hit him up. I've reached out, but I think it'd be a really really cool video and live stream if we both got together and talked about the game. But anyways, thank you all so much, and I will